Welcome back to the PS Pub. I think next to Naruto, the only character that has a comparable depth of releases on the PSP would be Benjamin Tennyson, as his franchise Ben 10 got alone 4 games on the PSP. Like Naruto, I have little exposure to this particular franchise. I know it was very popular at the time and still has a fairly large fan base, but again, similar to Naruto, I just never cared enough to check it out. That's not entirely accurate, as in Ben 10's case, it was a little after my time, so while I did think it kind of looked interesting, it wasn't something I was chomping at the bit to see what it was all about. Still, it left a large enough impact on pop culture that multiple video games were made and a few were ported to Sony's handheld, and considering they made a lot of these video games, I was always curious as to how well they would actually turn out. Today I wanted to take a quick look at the 4 Ben 10 games on the PSP. I do plan on covering these all as standalones someday, but for now I think it would be fun to dip my toe into a franchise I know next to nothing about, and see if it can't inspire me to look at the franchise as a whole a bit deeper afterwards. Before we jump into these in release order, the little bit of history that I looked up on the series is that it's about a kid named Ben Tennyson who gets the ability to transform into aliens, and he faces off against a bunch of other evil villains. I know it is deeper than that, but like I said before, my knowledge on this series is minimum at the very, very most. I know it airs on Cartoon Network and it started in 2006, and I believe there's still actually a series that's going right now, but that may have ended a few years ago, so don't quote me on that. Either way, we're going to do this in release order, starting with Ben 10 Protector of the Earth, released on October 30th, 2007. Releasing on the PS2, PSP, Wii, and 3DS. Minus the 3DS version, the game is a beat-em-up with action-adventure elements, whereas the 3DS game is still an action game, but it's a side-scrolling 2.5D game, and the game was developed by High Voltage Software. Upon booting up, the game tells us that it was E for everyone, almost like it was the commercial playing.
Rated E10 for ages 10 and up.
Which I thought was kind of weird, as I've never seen anything like that before. I'm not sure if this is a thing in other Cartoon Network games, but it is noted here if it shows up elsewhere. And spoiler alert, it does not show up in the other 3 games that we're going to cover as well. Right off the bat, it wastes no time in getting the story started. There is no story recap or synopsis on how or why Ben has his powers here, as I'm thinking the game assumed we already know all the origin stuff up to that point. Again, I hadn't consumed any Ben 10 content up to starting this game today, so it blew my mind hearing Colonel Campbell from Metal Gear Solid was voicing Max Tennyson, Ben's grandfather. And I won't lie to you, it was hard not thinking of the Colonel, and admittedly, I was having a hard time not just hearing Colonel Campbell in this game. Not a bad thing, I just thought it was kind of cool to bring up.
You created a time paradox.
Protector of the Earth is a 3D beat-em-up game, where you'll take control of Ben with the ability to transform into 5 other alien creatures. However, only 2 are unlocked from the start. You can freely change into any of the aliens at any time, so long as your Omnitrix still has power, which is notated by the green bar at the top. You can always switch back to Ben, but there is a slight cooldown before you can switch to another alien that doesn't last more than a few seconds. You'll be switching back and forth between the different aliens for combat and light puzzle solving, as each alien has their own special abilities that can be used in-game and for solving puzzles. For an example, Ben can do a roll by pressing circle, whereas Forearms can push rocks for access to new areas. And you're going to want to keep switching between the different aliens because while Ben has the ability to defend himself, he is going to be basically weaker than all the other alien forms in terms of abilities and unlockables. Quick side note is that if you lose all your health as an alien, it's not automatically game over. You'll switch back to Ben, and then you'll have to wait for a slightly longer cooldown before you can switch back into an alien. Ben and the aliens are able to perform combos utilizing a heavy and light attack button. Although combo strings have similar inputs, they all do different movesets and attacks based off of who you are playing as. The combat itself is pretty solid as well, with an easy to understand combo and fighting system with reliable controls. You gain access to more combos as you collect more Omnitrix points. Once you have enough to fill up the gold bar at the top, you'll receive a notification with your option to unlock a new combo. One of the cool features I like in this game is that on the top left of the screen, when you pull off a combo, it tells you which one you did. It's a small thing, but it's a nice touch, and it's something that they do carry on to the other games as well. The game is separated by regions and levels within those regions that you're able to replay upon completion of those levels. However, the game rewards exploration by having the player seek out and collect sumo cards in previously inaccessible areas, which unlocks in-game extras, as well as extra experience to get new combos for your characters, so it makes it worthwhile to go back to previously completed levels when you have access to new aliens to see if there is a way to use some of your new powers to access previously unreachable areas. One last thing to mention is that there are QTEs, but they only happen during boss fights. I don't know how complex these get, but the first couple of bosses QTEs weren't that bad to deal with. Despite the really fast start, which fans of the series might appreciate as it gets right into the action without the need to tread on plot points that they're more than likely already aware of, Protector of the Earth has a lot of qualities here that makes it a pretty fun to play and a good place to start if you wanted to try these games out on the PSP. The second PSP game, Ben 10 Alien Force, was released on October 28, 2008, and a few days less than a year after the Protector of the Earth came out. Developed by Monkey Bar Games, and similar to Protector of the Earth, the story starts off right away, assuming most people playing this are already familiar with the show. The game is set during the Ben 10 Alien Force TV series, which came out after the initial Ben 10 run had ended, and this series acted as a sequel to that original series, with the original run ending in 2008 and Alien Force beginning on April 18th of 2008. The game itself is in a lot of ways a more polished and upgraded version of Protector of the Earth in terms of its beat 'em up mechanics and overall gameplay, with some key differences. Although not as frenetic as the previous entry, the combos here are still fluid and feel nice upon impact, with the overall general gameplay loop maintaining its same form as before. Run into an area to which you'll be locked in, clear the enemies, and move on. Changing between aliens, all while collecting experience to level your aliens up to unlock new combos. There are still light puzzle elements in the game, and you'll need to unlock more aliens in order to find secrets in all the levels. Plus, there are no quick time events in this game. I do feel like there are a few drawbacks in comparison to the first game, however. I think the presentation overall is a bit cleaner here, however, certain aspects feel a bit downgraded, if that makes sense. For example, Protector of the Earth had this really nice map system that did a good job immersing you into the world, as it felt like you were actually traveling from location to location. Here, however, you get a simple level selection screen, which, I mean, on the surface it isn't the worst thing, as it's simple enough, but I would have kind of liked to have seen a bit more creativity here. I think the reason why they went with a more simplified approach to the level selection screen is that the levels themselves are a lot longer than the first game. At least that's how it was for me with the brief time I spent with them. Personally, I thought some of the levels went a tad bit too long, but that's just me. I enjoyed the variety of new characters to play as, but it did get a bit grindy towards the ending of each level. There is also a change in art style too, which again, this is going to be subjective, but where Protector of the Earth had a cel-shaded look to it, Alien Force went with a less cartoony and more streamlined look, which again, it's not a bad thing, but I preferred the cel-shaded look of the first game. It may seem like I'm attacking the game, but really overall the game does play pretty much the same, so there wasn't much reason to explain it all again, and rather, these are just some of the few differences I noticed jumping into the new game. As a sequel, Alien Force actually does a good job overall, but I could see fans enjoying the first game more from a subjective standpoint, as the changes here are somewhat minor in the grand scheme since the core gameplay is very similar. However, that means it could go either way on which of these you're going to prefer playing. I actually like the aesthetic overall in Protector of the Earth, but preferred the gameplay changes here, despite the levels being super long for what it's worth. A sort of sequel to Alien Force entitled Vilgax Attacks released almost a year to the date of the first Alien Force, releasing on October 27, 2009. This time developed by Papaya Studios, who would also develop the final Ben 10 game. While on the surface, it may seem like this game has a lot in common with the first two games in terms of what its gameplay style is like, however, that could be further from the truth. Sure, there's a more centered camera behind Ben now. However, the game is more of an action platformer than a straight up beat 'em up with platforming elements. Sure, you still have access to combo attacks and similar set of controls, heavy, light, special attacks, and guards. However, the guard and special buttons are swapped, plus you need to press up on the D-pad in order to change into your alien form now. The basic framework from the previous games are here. However, it feels cheaper to play, if that makes sense. Characters are floaty in both platforming and attacking, not to mention the enemy AI here is laughable, at least in the earlier levels. Granted, I haven't played the whole game yet, so it's possible that it gets better. Overall, so far, Vilgax Attacks isn't the most interesting of games to play. The emphasis on combat and fighting in the previous games for me were enough to keep you engaged, and it felt like the fighting in general felt somewhat deeper. Here, not so much. aliens you turn into now have no cooldown or time limit, which I actually thought was a bit of an interesting mechanic in the previous 2 games. You had to focus on your alien's health while also knowing when to sacrifice one in order to tank hits, or swapping out to recharge the cooldown faster with more health, and it just felt like the gameplay mechanics felt deeper in general. In the other 2 games, unless you collected green Omnitrix pickups, your time would slowly deplete while you were using the aliens, so it would behoove you to be able to swap between like Ben, the alien, collect power-ups. There was a lot of strategy involved there, whereas here you don't really have to worry about that. And in general, I found myself playing as the monkey character pretty much the whole time, and unless I absolutely needed to swap out, I really didn't have too many problems playing as him pretty much the whole time. Alright, there is a slight spoiler here, but after the first level, you will lose access to a few of your aliens, including one of the aliens for gliding, but more curiously, the one that's for hacking, which to me is weird because the game just had us learn how to use the hacking mechanic, only to lock them away arbitrarily. This happens because Ben was using his Omnitrix too much, causing it to short circuit, which fair enough, that makes sense from a story perspective, but immediately into the next level, short of not having those extra aliens to use, you can use the Omnitrix the exact same way, switching between aliens as quickly as you want to switch between them. So it's a bit of a plot hole and doesn't really make that much sense. Now, upgrading the aliens are the same as before, with you needing to collect enough yellow orbs to unlock a new ability. Unlike the first 2 games though, Ben will also be able to upgrade his health and Omni powers when he collects the plumber badges. Sadly, there is no extra collectibles in the same way as the previous 2 games. To give the game a bit of grace, I appreciated that they attempted to try to add a lot of variety here. The hacking minigame, destroying objects to remove obstacles, and even a flying minigame between levels that the game allows you to skip if you want. Which, while I appreciate the variety, it just kind of feels like you're going through the motions of a game rather than playing it, and I think that kind of sums up my experience as a whole, at least my first impressions with the game. I think what doesn't work for me here is that the game is designed like an action platformer, but they still wanted to use what worked in the other games, and to me it just doesn't gel that well together. Maybe after some refinement, the studio at Papaya could make this work, and luckily they did get another chance. Still, I think if you're a fan of the series, you'll appreciate this game and all the different aliens you can play as, but for me, it was the most disappointing of the Ben 10 games that I've played so far. Keeping up the yearly tradition of releasing Ben 10 games less than a year after the previous release, the final Ben 10 game to get a release on the PSP was Ultimate Alien Cosmic Destruction, which released only a little more than a year away from the launch of the Vita on October 5th, 2010. Again, developed by Papaya Studios, and while I wasn't a big fan of Vilgax Attacks, how does Ultimate Alien Cosmic Destruction stack up? I think arguably this might be one of the best of the 4 Ben 10 games. Now, that's also going to depend on what type of game you enjoy playing more though. The first 2 games are beat 'em ups with light platforming and puzzle elements that I think have different strengths and weaknesses, whereas the other 2 place emphasis on platforming, and this game really leans into that, which isn't a bad thing in my opinion. Cosmic Destruction streamlines a lot of the previous features in the game to create an overall solid experience, at least from my initial impressions. For the first time, you can choose a loadout of what aliens you want to play as, and I think that is a nice idea, allowing you to focus on 4 separate aliens rather than needing to juggle 8 different characters or more. You can mix and match which characters you like the best, although I should mention certain aliens will be required to progress in the level. Still, it doesn't seem as overwhelming compared to games in the past, and switching alien forms is now super easy. Each one is mapped to a different direction on the D-pad, and all you have to do is select which character you want to play as. Gameplay's been streamlined here as well too. This time the square button is your only attack, with triangle being your block button. If you press square then triangle, the character you're playing as will perform a dodge. At first, I'll admit I hated this because it felt like they were just taking away instead of trying to make things better. However, you can access 4 additional abilities by holding the R button and then pressing one of the 4 face buttons, giving each character their own special moves. These special moves are tied to the blue bar here and is easily refilled by attacking enemies. I think this actually works pretty good for this style of game, especially since they're leaning much heavier into the platforming side of things, so the balance in combat here is decent. The enemy AI is also a tremendous step up from the previous game, and although the combo system from the previous games is gone, I think fighting works here and is actually pretty fun once you know what you're doing. There's a bit of depth in how you want to power your alien characters up here as well, but again, it's easy to navigate. Pausing the game anytime you have access to the upgrade form screen. From there, all you have to do is select a form, choose whether you'd like to upgrade their stats or moves, and as long as you have the points to spare, you're good to go. Collectibles and secrets are back, and what makes it nice is that there feels like a decent amount of logic when designing how secrets are hidden. And not just that, but the level design in general. It feels like there was a lot more thought put into it than the previous entry. Everything feels like it was given a bit more time to be thought out, and it looks like the team at Papaya took any sort of feedback they received from the previous game and did what they could to make it an overall better experience. I think arguably this could be one of the best Ben 10 PSP games, but I think that's going to be a subjective thing. If you like beat 'em ups more, you'll likely like the first two better, but if you're into platformer action games, you'll like this one more. Now, the game isn't perfect. There is a glaring issue, and it deals with phantom platforms. A lot of the time you can see which ones are fake, but other times you cannot, leading to you falling more often than not. Now, I don't see why they put fake platforms that you cannot distinguish between unless under special circumstances. And I hope that the rest of the game isn't plagued by these, because that could be a deal breaker for some if that got really out of hand. And to be fair, you don't die automatically after falling in holes, unlike the previous games where if you fell off a cliff, you would just die automatically. Another curious decision is, despite being able to have different loadouts, levels seem to need specific characters or types of characters to progress. I didn't try out different level loadouts during my initial playthrough and kind of first thoughts, just going with whatever was recommended for the level. So I could see that causing a potential issue down the road if it makes levels just quite literally impossible to complete without the right aliens selected. I also thought that the graphics were kind of meh at best. They weren't bad or anything, and characters looked how they should, it just felt very meh overall. Still, despite some initial nitpicks, I walked away from this one wanting to play more of it, and I can't wait to get back into a full review of it someday in the future. And I think that is one of the best compliments I can give without playing through the whole game initially. After spending some time with these games, I can see why people enjoyed the franchise and can see why it reached its level of popularity. There's quite a bit to like here in terms of the characters and the story present. I'll probably check a few episodes out after I upload this video, so what was your favorite Ben 10 game? It doesn't necessarily have to be one of the PSP ones, because I'm curious if there were other good games in this franchise out there as well. And I look forward to covering these individually sometime in the future. Like and subscribe, and thank you all for watching.